There are 2 tales waiting for you, told one after the other by an odd set of 2. So prepare yourself, dear one, because this is Drops of Darkness.
I am Stranger, and I tell only fantasies. Whenever your world has a grip on your throat, I am there, waiting to unleash the monsters that sleep in my mind, so that they may remind you that you have sharp teeth and claws of your own. Not many people know about rat kings. Wade had never heard of them, but was happy enough to learn if it meant he would get to keep talking to the woman on the train. She was gorgeous, but not his usual type. Not because he didn't find people like her attractive. The dark, moody types who could stare into your soul if they deemed you worth making eye contact with. Because he definitely did. But he found he needed a certain level of nerve to chat up someone like that. A level, it turns out, he did not possess. But on that nearly empty train, it was her who slid into the seat across from him. So feeling brave, he cast out a compliment on the tattoo peeking out from her sleeve, and found himself reeled into an eager explanation of an old Germanic lore. After admitting he couldn't really tell what the lines on her hand were supposed to be, he was delighted when she slipped her arm out of her coat to show him the rest. The tattoo stretched from her hand to the pit of her elbow, and despite what it was of, the artwork was quite pretty. "Are those rats?" he asked. The woman flashed him a smile and nodded. "Did you know that rats can get their tails tangled up in a knot?" Wade shook his head. "Well, they do. There's legends about it. If rats get too close together and aren't paying attention, their dirty little tails can get twisted, and the harder they try to get free, the tighter the knot gets." "I didn't know rats could somehow get more gross," Wade replied, leaning in closer to get a better look at her outstretched arm. She shifted her glossy black hair from one shoulder to the other, flinging the smell of vanilla and cloves towards him. After that, not even the thought of a squirming, tangled ball of dirt-covered rats could keep him from wanting to find out if she had any other tattoos under the rest of her clothes. "They don't die, you know," she continued. "More and more of them get stuck, and it makes a swirling mass that lives and moves and eats as one. That's when they become a rat king." "Well, that's terrifying," said Wade, sitting back. The train slowed to a stop and opened its doors, but no one came on, and no one got off. "I guess it is a bit terrifying, isn't it?" People usually associate them with death or the plague, which does make sense, but to be able to work together, creating a new collective entity so they can all survive, that's a rare, beautiful thing. She stated the last part as if it was an indisputable fact and not a more than slightly eccentric matter of opinion. I guess it is when you put it that way." Wade wasn't fully convinced, but the thought of saying so felt rude. "Yeah? Most people would think I'm a bit crazy for that," she said, pulling her coat back on. "I don't think there's anything crazy about finding the beauty where others won't necessarily look." The words tumbled out of his mouth before he could decide if they'd made him sound insightful or like an idiot. But based on the way she looked at him, it seemed to have been the right enough thing to say either way. The lights of the city went dark as they sped into the tunnel to the underground. "Well, this is me," she said, the next time the train slowed to a stop. "You got much longer to go?" "Oh, we passed my stop a while ago. I don't think I've ever actually been to this part of the city. Should be interesting finding my way home." Wade watched her stand up and sling her bag over her head, and he hoped that this wasn't where the night was going to end. The doors hissed open, and after a moment of thought and with a light in her eyes, she asked him if he'd like to see something beautiful. He nodded. He would have said yes to anything that sounded even halfway like an invitation. But as he stepped onto the platform and the doors closed behind him, He started to wonder if he shouldn't have just stayed on the train. He wasn't lying when he said he'd never been to this part of the city. The underground station smelt like old piss and wet cardboard, with a hint of about 100 other foul smells that changed every 10 feet or so. The lights eked out a jaundicey orange glow, and once the sound of the train faded, an awkward quiet settled around them. "So I never got your name," said Wade as they walked. "Did you mean it, what you said on the train?" she asked, as if he hadn't said anything at all. What part?" They turned a corner, and to his relief, he saw stairs leading to the street above. "The part about finding beauty where others won't look." Yeah, sure." He walked quicker. The air was already starting to smell fresher. Everything was fine. It was just this damn tunnel that made him feel uneasy. "Where are you going?" He was already taking the steps 2 at a time, but when he stopped and looked, she was still fully swathed in orange light below him. "It's this way," she said, pointing to an even darker section of the underground station. "Come on, it's not much farther." It was fine, he thought, descending back to her. Those weren't the only stairs to the top side. She knew this part of town, and he didn't. This was still a good choice. "Okay, we're here," she said a few minutes later. "See? I told you it wasn't far." The signs in this part of the underground were faded, and it smelt different. Musty, like something rotten gone dry. She knelt at the edge of the tracks and ushered him to come join her. "Don't be a pussy," he thought to himself. "It's probably just some old graffiti. He could go look, and then they'd be back at the stairs in no time." Then she whistled softly into the dark. And not long after she stopped, something answered. A collective of high-pitched whines were quickly joined by a chorus of scratching and crunching as something large moved over the tracks. "There you are," she cooed as the mass came into the light. There were thousands of them, if not millions of rats, tangled together in countless knots that formed one giant fluid mass of fur, tails, eyes, teeth, blood, feces, and... "Is that a person?" Wade stammered as it moved closer. "Yeah, they were joined in a few weeks ago," she said with awe in her voice. "At first I maybe thought they were just eating him, but look. He's still alive." As the Rat King approached, the face of the man dipped in and out of view. The rest of his body must have already sunk deeper, but his hair and his beard were meshed into the surface, pulling his mouth open and closed as the shrieking rat squirmed around him. And his eyes stayed locked on the platform, on Wade and the woman. Isn't it amazing? They say if you feed a Rat King, it'll grant you a wish. She grabbed his hand and pulled him closer to the edge. Wade felt himself sway. Then, like someone waking up from a dream, he jerked his arm back and used the only thing he could to push himself away from the edge. She was still kneeling when she grabbed his hand, and her hair felt so smooth and soft as it slipped out of his fingers. She flew forward, and he fell back. He smelt vanilla and cloves. The screeching echoed behind him as he ran, and it didn't stop until he was halfway up the stairs. When the night air hit his face, he looked up at the sky, and knowing what was still just beneath his feet, it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen.
Hello, everyone. In between stories, we like to highlight a cause that is worth our collective attention. For March, in Women's History Month, we decided to highlight the National Women's Law Center. The NWLC has been at the forefront of the fight for gender justice for over 4 decades. They work tirelessly to break down barriers, advocate for policy changes, and create a more inclusive future for all. You can find out more and donate at www.nwlc.org or from the link on our website at dropsofdarkness.com. Now, back into the shadows we go. I am someone, and I tell only truth. Whenever something slithers through the barrier between worlds, I am there, not to stop them, but to watch them and remind you of the countless terrors your kind has survived, all on their own. This story was submitted by As Above, So Below 75, whose Reddit handle is listed in the episode's description. Back in the day, my parents had an authentic Japanese motif for their bedroom. My mom was an interior designer and spent all of her free time antiquing for different pieces, as she called them. I remember a huge Buddha statue made from solid brass at the foot of their bed and a silk room divider depicting different scenes from an ancient Japanese dynasty. There's a lot more to it all that I'm not remembering because I was very young at the time. At some point, my mother came home with 2 beautiful antique lamps that came straight from Japan through a client of hers. The lamps were carved and painted porcelain, and like the room divider, they depicted scenes from a long ago, simpler time in Japan. The main design on the lamps was a geisha woman holding a fan partially obscuring her face. Each lamp had one, but each geisha was slightly different. They were very delicate, highly detailed, and very beautiful. My sister, who was also very young at the time, dubbed them the Sisters. This story actually centers around my sister, who we'll call Elle. One night, our parents went out to dinner with friends, so they called in our babysitter, Doris. At the time, the TV channels in our den were restricted, but our parents got all the cable channels in their bedroom, so we all would hang out there when they weren't home. This particular night, we were all watching something rated R and scary, and it got late, so my brother and I went to our bedrooms. My sister stayed up with Doris to watch the rest of the movie. My sister said Doris was dozing off and she was left to watch the scary movie by herself. Trying not to look at the screen during a particularly scary part, Elle looked towards one of the lamps on the nightstand. Glancing at it quickly, she said it looked like something on the lamp moved. Staring at it now, she swore something was moving on both lamps. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. She said the geisha on the lamps were moving and fluttering their fans while whispering and giggling at her and to each other. Petrified in total disbelief, Elle screamed and woke the babysitter. Doris was awakened, I'm sure, thinking the house was on fire. My sister pointed to the lamps. Doris, still a bit disoriented, for just a second, saw the geisha move their fans back into position and freeze. She calmed my sister down by telling her it was only her imagination, and eventually, Elle fell asleep. After putting my sister to bed, Doris waited in the den for my parents to get home. She never mentioned anything about the lamps, but anytime my mother called her after that, she was busy and would never come to our house again. Years later, when I was already an adult, I ran into Doris. She asked me how everyone was doing and if we still lived there. I told her no, and that my mother had a fire shortly after we moved and lost almost everything. When I asked her why she never came back, she said, "You're not going to believe this, but the last night I was there, something really strange happened." She said that night, while she was the only one left awake, she kept hearing voices coming from my parents' room. She first thought my sister was pretending to sleep and pranking her. When she realized that Elle was fully asleep, she became truly afraid. She said the only thing that kept her from running out of the house and never looking back was her responsibility to my parents, adding that before my sister went to bed, she saw something that she would never forget. I said, "Was it the Japanese lamps?" She's like, "No one would ever believe me, but I saw them move. I know what I saw, and Elle saw it too." This was many years ago, and I never saw Doris again. My brother had his own experiences with those lamps while we lived there. Time passed, my parents divorced, my mother sold that house when I graduated high school. She had a new house built in the country where she planned to enjoy her early retirement. She transported all of her beloved pieces there when it was completed. Within 5 years, a freak fire broke out while she wasn't home, and the house and everything in it burned to the ground. The firefighters said they never saw a house fire that burned so hot. It was so intense that the following day, the top of the refrigerator was touching the floor like a rainbow. Later on, my mom told me, although the fire was devastating in many ways, it was also liberating.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Drops of Darkness, which is written, voiced, and produced by Anodyne Vaughn and Cameron Helkuik. If you enjoyed your drift into the shadows, help keep the stories alive by sharing the show, leaving a review, and if you really want to earn the favor of these dark storytellers, tether yourself to their world by tapping subscribe. If you have a true paranormal story of your own that you'd like to be read by someone, you can make the offering to submissions@dropsofdarkness.com or through the form on our website. Until next time, dear one, and remember, when the darkness looks your way, hold its